On the long, winding roads of the Sierra Nevada lies a place drenched in fog and haunted by tragedy. Donner Pass. For decades, truckers and bus drivers have whispered about strange sightings, unexplained accidents, and a woman in white who appears without warning. Tonight, we revisit one of those chilling accounts, the story of a veteran driver who swore he encountered something beyond reason on a midnight trip from Sacramento to Reno. This is the tale of the woman on Donner Pass, *high in the Sierra Nevada. There is a mountain pass notorious among long-haul truckers and bus drivers alike. Donner Pass, winding, treacherous, and cloaked in fog at night. It is infamous not only for fatal accidents, but also for whispered tales of restless spirits that haunt its curves. Michael Harris, a veteran bus driver in his mid-40s, had spent nearly 2 decades driving cross-country routes. He was known for his steady hands and unshakable nerves. To him, ghost stories were just truck stop chatter. But one night, on a trip from Sacramento to Reno, his certainty would be shaken forever. His 45-seat coach crawled up the dark incline, headlights cutting through thick fog. Most passengers were asleep, their faces pale under the dim interior lights. Michael sipped bitter coffee from a travel mug, glancing at the dashboard clock. It read 1:20 a.m., the dead hour, when fatigue hits hardest, and when legends say the dead walk. As the bus rounded a curve, Michael stiffened. Up ahead, just beyond the guardrail, stood a woman in a long white dress, hair spilling over her face, one thin hand raised, beckoning. At first, he thought it was fatigue playing tricks. But as the bus drew closer, her pale form sharpened in the beams of the headlights. She was unmistakably real, or seemed to be. A woman in the front row gasped, "Oh my God, is she waving us down?" A college kid muttered nervously, "What the hell is she doing out here at this hour?" Michael's instincts screamed not to stop. He pressed the accelerator, guiding the bus past. As he glanced into the rearview mirror, his stomach clenched. The woman hadn't moved, but her head slowly turned, as if her dark eyes followed the bus. Michael tried to shake it off, but minutes later, at the next bend, his breath caught in his throat. She was there again, the same woman, the same gesture, the same empty face. Passengers erupted in whispers. "That's impossible. We just passed her. Did she run ahead?" "No way." An elderly man whispered hoarsely, "Don't look at her. Don't acknowledge her. She'll follow us." Cold sweat rolled down Michael's back. He pressed harder on the gas, determined not to slow down. But at every curve, the woman returned, as though the mountain itself was looping her apparition back in front of them. Suddenly, a scream split the air. "She's on the bus." Every head whipped round. In the middle row, the woman in white now sat silently, hands folded neatly on her lap, hair still veiling her face. No one had seen her board. The doors had been locked since Sacramento. Panic erupted. Passengers shrieked. Some prayed. Others clutched their seats with white knuckles. Michael's hands shook on the wheel. In the mirror, he saw her tilt her head slightly, as if smiling beneath that curtain of hair. Then, from the very back of the bus, came the sound of a baby crying. Michael's blood froze. There were no infants on board, yet the wails grew louder, echoing beneath the floorboards, vibrating in his chest. Passengers shouted, terrified. The steering wheel jerked violently, as if unseen hands were wrenching it. The massive vehicle veered toward the guardrail. Michael fought back, knuckles white, the abyss yawning just feet away. Passengers cried out in sheer horror. Some fell to their knees, chanting prayers. Others clawed at the windows, desperate for escape. Michael risked another glance. The seat where she had been sitting was empty. For a split second, relief washed over him, till he looked back at the road. There she was again, standing dead center in the lane, arms outstretched, blocking the bus. Michael shouted and wrenched the wheel. Tires screamed, the bus fishtailed, nearly toppling over the cliff. Screams tore through the cabin as the vehicle swayed, then righted itself, barreling past the figure that dissolved into fog dot. At last, the bus cleared the final curve. The apparition was gone. Silence reigned inside, broken only by sobs and ragged breathing. No one spoke of what they'd seen. No one dared. When daylight finally broke and the bus rolled into Reno, passengers filed off, pale and trembling eyes averted, lips sealed. Michael sat behind the wheel, staring blankly, hands still shaking. The woman's dark gaze burned into his memory. 3 days later, the Reno Gazette reported a horrific accident. A semi-truck had plunged off Donner Pass in the early hours of the morning. The driver, who miraculously survived, swore he'd lost control when he tried to swerve around a woman in white standing in the middle of the road. Locals whisper that decades ago, a woman and her infant perished in a snowstorm on that very pass. Their bodies were never recovered. Ever since, drivers say, her ghost still waves for help, eternally stranded on Donner Pass. Asterisk, not only on treacherous mountain passes do spirits linger. In a small town in the American South, hidden among ancient oak trees and lonely dirt roads, people still whisper about a family haunted within their own home. A sudden death, a grief too heavy to bear, and then strange sounds began to echo each night. The faint aroma of incense drifting through darkened halls, footsteps where no one walked, and the shadow of a loved one long gone. The ghost in the southern house in the deep south of the United States lies a small town, tucked away among ancient oak forests. The dirt roads that wind into the town are usually empty, carrying only the hum of cicadas in the summer and the whisper of wind brushing through dense trees. To outsiders, the town appears quiet, ordinary, untouched by the horrors that plague larger cities. But there was one house, sitting just beyond the tree line, that people in town avoided speaking about. A house once belonging to the Walker family, a decent, well-liked family whose name was forever marked by tragedy. The story begins with the sudden death of Ethan Walker, the youngest son. Ethan was 17, a bright, cheerful boy who loved baseball and never went a day without smiling. One autumn afternoon, while playing near the creek behind town, Ethan slipped. By the time they found him the next morning, his body was cold, his hair matted with mud and water, and his eyes wide open as if he had left something unsaid. The Walker family fell into grief. His mother, Martha, grew quiet, spending hours in the living room staring at his photograph. His father, Daniel, tried to work and keep the family together, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion and pain. His older sister, Claire, who was away at college, returned home whenever she could, only to find the house growing darker, heavier, each time she visited. And then, strange things began to happen. 2 weeks after Ethan's funeral, Martha heard faint footsteps in the hallway upstairs. Sometimes she thought she heard water running in the bathroom, though when she checked, the faucets were dry. Daniel insisted it was just her grief clouding her senses. But the occurrences grew stronger. One evening, while the family sat together in the living room, Claire suddenly stiffened. "Mum, do you hear that? Someone's calling my name." Martha's lips trembled. She had heard it too. A weak, familiar voice drifting down the hallway. "Mum." Daniel sprang up, switching on every light in the house. He searched each room. Nothing. Every door locked, every window closed. But the silence that followed was thick with dread. After that night, the haunting escalated. Claire began to smell 5-spice incense, a strange scent the family had never used. It came only from Ethan's bedroom, the room Martha kept untouched, frozen in time as if he was still alive. One night, Daniel woke to the sound of something rolling. He followed it downstairs and froze. Ethan's old baseball was slowly rolling across the wooden floor. No draft, no one around. Just the hollow sound of the ball echoing through the room. Fear seeped into every corner of their lives. Martha became convinced Ethan's spirit lingered. She spent hours in his room, whispering into the silence, sometimes breaking into sobs. Daniel denied it aloud, but deep down, the memory of his son's lifeless eyes haunted him every night. Claire endured the worst. While studying one evening, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, the hallway was empty. But when she turned back, her notebook lay open on the desk, a message scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Claire, I'm so cold." The family broke under the weight of fear. Martha sought help from a local pastor. He came to bless the house, praying for Ethan's soul. That night, as they drifted into an easy sleep, a scream tore through the silence. It came from Ethan's room. Daniel and Martha burst in to find the bedsheets twisted and torn, as if someone had been thrashing violently upon them. Daniel demanded they leave the house, but Martha refused. "Ethan is still here. We can't abandon him again." "I won't leave," Claire begged her mother, but Martha only grew stranger. Pale and gaunt, she wandered the halls at night, clutching Ethan's old jacket, whispering to the air as if she was speaking with her son. The final night came when Claire returned home from college. She found Martha standing in the living room, surrounded by red candles, calling Ethan's name with a broken voice. Claire rushed forward, but just then a cold wind blew through the house, snuffing out every flame. In the suffocating darkness, both mother and daughter heard it a faint whisper, "Mum, I'm here." Claire screamed and clung to her mother. When Daniel came home, he found them huddled in the shadows. Candles scattered across the floor, and the entire room thick with the sickly scent of 5-spice incense. After that night, the Walkers left the house behind forever. They moved far away, carrying with them the scars of fear and grief. The house stood abandoned for years, slowly decaying, its windows broken, its walls collapsing. Yet townsfolk still whispered. On misty nights, they claimed footsteps could be heard along the rotting upstairs hallway. A faint glow sometimes flickered from the second-floor window within's old room. No one dared to go near. And the story of the Walker family remains, chilling anyone who hears it to this day. In lonely highways, past midnight, drivers sometimes whisper of strange encounters, phantom lights, ghostly voices, and figures who vanish when approached. Among these tales, one stands apart, the story of a young woman who waits by the roadside, silently asking for a ride home. Those who stop rarely forget what follows. This is the tale of the midnight hitchhiker, *, on the long stretches of highway that cut through the American Midwest. Truckers and late-night drivers often share stories to keep themselves awake. Tales of ghostly lights, phantom voices on the CB radio, and lone figures by the roadside. Most are brushed off as imagination, until one story returned again and again, told in hushed tones by those who swore it happened to them. It was the story of a hitchhiker who appeared on a deserted road at midnight, and the terror that followed. It was late autumn when Mark Holloway, a 34-year-old delivery driver, found himself running behind schedule. He had been on the road for nearly 10 hours, hauling electronics from Chicago to Kansas City. The sky was moonless. The road stretched out like a ribbon of darkness, and the only sounds were the low hum of his engine and the occasional static crackle of the radio dot. As the clock ticked past midnight, the air grew colder. A thin mist began to rise from the cornfields on either side of the two-lane road. Mark rubbed his eyes, trying to stay alert. The fatigue weighed on him like lead, and the endless monotony of the asphalt was pulling him into a trance. That's when he saw her, up ahead. Illuminated faintly by his headlights, was a young woman standing by the side of the road. She wore a pale dress that fluttered in the cold wind, and her long dark hair clung to her face. She didn't wave, didn't move, she simply stood, her eyes fixed on the approaching truck. Mark's foot instinctively eased off the gas. A dozen thoughts raced through his mind. What was a woman doing out here, at this hour, alone in the middle of nowhere? She looked no older than 20. Maybe her car had broken down. Maybe she was in danger. Against his better judgment, he slowed and pulled to the shoulder. The woman stepped closer, her face now visible in the harsh white glow of the headlights. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent. Mark rolled down the window. "Hey, you need a ride?" he called out. She nodded silently. Without a word, she opened the passenger door and climbed in. A gust of icy air filled the cab. Mark glanced at her as he pulled back onto the road. She sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. "You okay?" he asked. "Where you headed?" Her voice was barely audible. "Home." Mark waited for more, but she said nothing. He cleared his throat. "Where's home?" She slowly turned her head, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were dark, deep pools that seemed to reflect no light. "Just keep driving," she whispered. Unease prickled the back of his neck. Something about her presence chilled him more than the cold air outside. Still, he pressed on, the road stretching endlessly into the night. Minutes passed in silence. Mark tried the radio, hoping to break the tension, but only static filled the speakers. He shut it off. That's when he noticed something strange. The rearview mirror showed the empty seat beside him. Yet when he glanced to his right, she was there, motionless, staring ahead. His breath caught. He checked again. Mirror empty seat. Real eyes woman still there. A nervous laugh escaped his lips. "Man, I must be more tired than I thought." The woman turned her head slowly toward him. "You shouldn't have stopped," she murmured. A jolt of fear shot through him. His grip tightened on the wheel. "Excuse me?" She leaned closer, her voice now a chilling whisper in his ear. "They never stop. Not after me." The temperature inside the cab seemed to plummet. Frost crawled across the inside of the windshield, and Mark's breath came out in pale mist. He stomped on the defroster, but it was useless. The truck rattled violently, as though caught in a sudden storm, yet outside the night was calm. Mark's heart pounded. "What the hell are you?" Her lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "You'll see." And then, in the blink of an eye, she vanished. The seat was empty. No door had opened. No sound had been made. She was simply gone. Mark gasped, his hands trembling on the wheel. Relief flooded him for only a second before he heard it, a soft sobbing coming from the sleeper cab behind him. He froze. Slowly, he reached for the curtain separating the front from the back. The sobbing grew louder, a young woman crying in despair. He yanked the curtain open. The bunk was empty. Suddenly, cold hands clamped down on his shoulders from behind. A scream tore from his throat as he turned. The woman was there, crouched on the bunk, her pale face inches from his, eyes black as void, mouth stretching unnaturally wide. "Take me home," she hissed. Mark swerved violently, the truck fishtailing on the deserted road. Tires screeched, gravel flew. Somehow, he managed to regain control and slammed the truck to a halt. Heart hammering, he jumped out, stumbling into the cold night air. He ran a few paces down the empty road before collapsing to his knees. The fields were silent. The truck loomed behind him, its headlights cutting through the mist. Slowly, he forced himself to look back at the cab. She was sitting in the driver's seat. Mark's scream echoed across the fields. He turned and ran blindly into the darkness, branches tearing at his clothes, his lungs burning. He didn't stop until he saw the faint lights of a farmhouse in the distance by dawn. A farmer found him collapsed on the porch, incoherent and shaking. The police were called, and when they went to retrieve his truck, it sat idling by the roadside empty. No sign of the woman, no footprints, nothing but frost on the inside of the windshield and a faint scent of perfume lingering in the cab. Mark never drove that route again. He quit long-haul trucking altogether, haunted by the memory of that night. But he wasn't the last. Other drivers, years later, spoke of a pale young woman by the roadside at midnight, asking for a ride home. Some claimed to have picked her up. Others swore they saw her vanish into thin air as they passed. And so the legend endures on the lonely highways of the Midwest. When the clock strikes midnight, beware the hitchhiker who waits in the mist. For if you stop, she may never let you go. Every town hides a secret, but some secrets refuse to stay buried. Deep in the American South lies a stretch of land whispered about in hushed tones. Pine Hill. Locals avoid it after dark, claiming the woods there are alive with more than just the rustle of trees. Families who tried to settle near Pine Hill never lasted long. Strange noises, shadows in the windows, and children speaking of voices no one else could hear. Most dismissed it as folklore, until the Holloway family moved in. This is the story of the shadows in Pine Hill. Asterisk, the shadows in Pine Hill. Every small town has its secrets. In the American South, tucked between endless pine forests and swamps that never fully dry, there lies a place locals avoid after sunset. Pine Hill. For decades, whispers of strange disappearances and figures moving in the tree line have haunted the community. Some say it's just old folklore meant to scare children. But for one family, the shadows of Pine Hill became all too real. The Holloways moved into Pine Hill in the summer of 1996. Daniel and Rebecca Holloway, along with their two children, 15-year-old Lucas and 12-year-old Emily, were eager to start fresh. Daniel had inherited a small house from his uncle, a weather-beaten place at the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods. It was old, creaky, but it was theirs. From the very first night, Emily noticed something strange. As she lay awake, listening to the rustle of the pine trees outside her window, she saw faint movements in the shadows along the tree line. She told herself it was just animals. But when she mentioned it at breakfast, her mother frowned. "Strange," Rebecca said. "I thought I heard someone walking on the porch last night." Daniel brushed it off. "It's a rural town. Probably raccoons. Don't let it spook you." But Emily wasn't convinced. The days passed uneventfully at first. Lucas made friends at school, Daniel took on carpentry jobs, and Rebecca spent her time fixing up the old house. But at night, unease settled over the family. It started with noisy footsteps on the gravel driveway, the creak of the back porch, whispering voices that faded when anyone got close. Rebecca often found the front gate open in the morning, though she swore she locked it before bed. Then came the shadows. One evening, while Lucas was shooting hoops in the driveway, he saw a tall figure standing between the trees. Thinking it was a neighbor, he waved. The figure didn't move. It simply watched. Uneasy, Lucas went inside. By the time he looked back, the figure was gone. Emily's experiences grew worse. She often woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching at her window. When she finally dared to look one night, she saw a pale face peering in her face with eyes too dark, too hollow to belong to any person. She screamed. Daniel rushed in, but when he threw open the curtains, nothing was there. Just the night wind rattling the glass. The next morning, they found something carved into the wood outside her window. A single word, "Mine." Rebecca became increasingly paranoid. She insisted on keeping the lights on at night. Daniel, though skeptical, couldn't ignore the tension. He set up a motion sensor light on the porch. For 2 nights, it stayed quiet. On the third, the light flicked on at 2:13 a.m. Daniel grabbed his shotgun and went outside. The yard was empty, but in the dirt, just beyond the light's reach, were footprints. Bare, long-toed, pressed deep into the soil leading toward the woods. The haunting escalated. Emily began sleepwalking, waking up at the edge of the tree line with no memory of how she got there. Lucas complained of nightmares, always the same. Shadowy figures surrounding his bed, whispering his name. Rebecca swore she heard a woman's voice singing lullabies in the living room when no one was there. One night, Daniel woke to the sound of the back door opening. Heart pounding, he crept downstairs. In the kitchen, the door stood wide open, swinging gently in the wind. And there, standing in the doorway, was Emily. Her eyes were closed, her face expressionless. She began to walk toward the forest. Daniel rushed forward, scooping her into his arms. She stirred awake, confused and terrified. "Daddy, they were calling me," she whispered. "They said, it's time." Desperate, Rebecca sought help from locals. Most dismissed her, but an old shopkeeper finally spoke. "You're living on Pine Hill land," he said gravely. "People have been seeing shadows there for as long as anyone can remember. Some say it's the spirits of those who never left. Others say it's older, darker. They take what they want." Rebecca shuddered. "What do they want?" The old man shook his head. "Children. Always children." The Holloways considered moving, but Daniel insisted they couldn't just abandon the house. He promised to keep watch. For several nights, he sat awake with the shotgun across his lap. Nothing happened, until one night, the house shook with a loud bang. The lights flickered. From every window, shadowy figures pressed against the glass. their faces distorted, eyes gleaming like coals. The family huddled together in the living room as whispers filled the house. The temperature dropped, their breaths fogging the air. Then, one shadow slipped inside. It stretched unnaturally tall, limbs bending at impossible angles, face a blur of darkness. It pointed a long finger toward Emily. The whispers grew louder. Emily clutched her mother, sobbing. Daniel fired the shotgun. The blast shattered the living room window. For a heartbeat, the shadow dissolved into smoke. But when the dust cleared, more figures were waiting outside, dozens of them, swaying between the trees. The family fled that night, leaving everything behind. They never returned. To this day, the Holloway house still stands at the edge of Pine Hill, abandoned, rotting. Locals say if you drive past on a moonless night, you can see small handprints on the inside of the windows. Some swear they've heard a young girl crying, her voice echoing through the pines. And the shadows, they are still there, watching, waiting for the next family foolish enough to move into Pine Hill. Peace. This is the complete story for In English. Written in full narrative style, ready for a 20-minute reading. Do you want me to create the intro lead-in for story 4 to like I did with the others so it flows nicely into the narration? In every city, there are places where people refuse to go after dark. Abandoned hospitals, empty schools, forgotten factories, each carrying echoes of the past. But none are more unsettling than the one place meant to keep silence. A cemetery in the heart of New Orleans, where moss drapes over crooked tombstones and mist rises from the marshes. There stands an old graveyard said to be cursed. The locals warn, once you enter after midnight, you may not leave alone. This is the story of the Graveyard Whispers. *N, New Orleans. The air itself feels heavy with history. Jazz drifts through the streets, voodoo shops glow under dim lanterns, and above-ground cemeteries stand like cities of the dead. Among them, one graveyard on the outskirts of the city carries a darker reputation. Locals call it St. Mercy's Rest, though mercy is the last thing anyone finds there. The Carter siblings never believed in ghost stories. Thomas, 22, had just returned from college, and his younger sister, Lily, 19, was eager to prove she wasn't afraid of anything. One humid summer night, their friends dared them to spend an hour inside St. Mercy's after midnight. Bring back something. From inside, their friend Jake said with a smirk, "And we'll know you're not chicken." Thomas laughed it off. "It's just stone and bones. What's the worst that can happen?" Lily, always stubborn, grinned. "I'm in. Let's prove them wrong." They set out just before midnight, carrying only a flashlight and a pack of matches. The gates of St. Mercy's loomed tall and rusted, wrapped in vines. The iron bars screeched as Thomas pushed them open. The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted colder, heavier, as though the night itself were holding its breath. Rows of mausoleums stretched into the shadows, their marble facades cracked and stained. Names long forgotten were carved into stone, half swallowed by moss. Candles flickered in broken holders, though no one had lit them. Lily tightened her grip on Thomas's arm. "It feels wrong here," he forced a smile. "It's just old. Cemeteries are creepy because we make them creepy." But as they walked deeper, even Thomas began to feel watched. The first whisper came near a row of crumbling tombs, faint like wind through grass, but too clear to be chance. "Thomas." He froze. The sound carried his name. Lily turned pale. "You heard that right. "Yeah," he admitted. "It's just someone messing with us. Jake probably followed us." But when he swung the flashlight around, the beam revealed only empty graves and leaning crosses. No footsteps, no laughter, just silence pressing against their ears. They pressed on, determined to grab something and leave. At the center of the graveyard stood a massive angel statue, its stone wings cracked, face weathered smooth by time. At its base lay a fresh rose, deep red, though no living person had been here for years. Lily knelt and reached for it. "Don't," Thomas warned, but she had already picked it up. The petals felt cold, wet, as though slicked with dew. She shivered. "It's just a flower." Then the whispers grew louder, dozens of voices, overlapping, rising from every direction. "Give it back. Not yours. Leave." The siblings stumbled backward, heartbeats hammering. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died. Darkness swallowed them. Thomas struck a match. The tiny flame revealed figures moving between the graves. Not solid, but shadows, gliding soundlessly. Their faces were pale, mouths open in silent screams. One figure stopped, only feet away, a woman in a tattered black dress, her veil shredded, her eyes to hollow pits. She lifted a skeletal hand and pointed at Lily. The rose dropped from Lily's fingers. The woman's whisper was sharp as glass. "Stay." They ran, through rows of tombs, stumbling over roots, tripping on cracked stone. The whispers followed, rising into wails. Footsteps pounded behind them, though nothing touched the ground. Each time Thomas glanced back, more shadows gathered, crowding closer, faster. He shouted, dragging Lily by the hand. But the cemetery seemed endless, paths twisting back upon themselves. No matter which way they turned, the angel's statue loomed ahead again. The discarded rose, now black and shriveled at its feet. Lily sobbed. "We're not getting out." Thomas clenched his jaw. "We have to keep moving." Then, something seized Lily's arm. She screamed as a shadow wrapped around her wrist, cold and heavy. Thomas struck out blindly, swinging the flashlight like a club. It passed through smoke, but the grip released. "Run," he yelled. They broke into a sprint, lungs burning, until at last they saw the rusted gates ahead. The iron stood half open, the outside world only steps away. Behind them, the whispers rose into a shriek. As they stumbled through the gate, the air shifted. The noise stopped. The graveyard fell silent once more. They collapsed on the road outside, trembling, gasping for air. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Lily whispered, "We shouldn't have gone in." Thomas stared back at the gate, now closed as if it had never been touched. His hand shook as he held up the flashlight. The metal casing was covered in something dark. Not dirt, not rust, it was blood. The Carters never spoke of that night again. Their friends mocked them for refusing to bring proof. But Thomas and Lily knew better. To this day, locals say St. Mercy's Rest still whispers to those who pass by after midnight. Some claim to hear their own names carried on the wind. Others swear they've seen a young woman in black waiting at the gates, holding a rose as red as fresh blood. If you ever hear her call your name, don't answer. And above all, never take anything from the graveyard. Thank you for listening to tonight's story with Peace in the Shadows. If you enjoy haunting tales and want to keep walking with me through the darkness, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a single story. Your support is what keeps peace, bringing more chilling tales, and keeps the shadows closer than you think. Until next time, this is Peace, wishing you safety, and I'll see you in the shadows.